I've enjoyed delivering something that I feel drives value and improves the quality of life for people. I think I spend a fair amount of time trying to distill what success in the role would look like. I'm not actually looking for strengths and weaknesses. I'm looking for how accurate their self-awareness around those types of things are.
Hi, my name is Rohit Bassi, and welcome to the People Quotient podcast, where we focus on the most important asset in your organization, your people. In this podcast, I'll be speaking with CEOs, investors, and executives from around the world to learn how they build high-performing teams. But before we get going, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you like what you hear, give us a thumbs up and invite your friends and colleagues to also join the community. Without further ado, let's listen in. My guest today is Amit Shah, COO of Virta Health, a high-growth digital health company with a mission to reverse type 2 diabetes through digitally driven personalized care. Let's find out how Amit finds talent to help him on his mission.
Amit Shah. I am so genuinely excited about this. First of all, so good to see you. You have not changed a bit, which is good. And unless you don't think it is, I think it's really, man, I'm so excited. First of all, I'm so excited to reconnect. It's been a long time and super stoked because I've always viewed you in having, from very early parts of your career as somebody with tremendous people skills and EQ. Obviously, there's an intelligence part. We won't go there because you don't want to reveal too much. But I think now, all jokes aside,
I lack the intelligence because I have this other stuff?
I think, man, you've got some best combinations when it comes to leading people. And, from what I know a little bit about your journey, you've had some really meaningful roles and which have both from values perspective, what the companies did or are doing, but also they just make sense for me to align who you are with those companies. And as you build those teams, I'm sure you've had to think about that as you which people you bring on. So without blabbering too much, why don't I have you give your background to those listening, and then we'll go from there, man.
Sure. First, I'll just say thank you again. Really great to reconnect, Rohit. And I just have enjoyed hearing what you're up to now. I was like, wait, now this guy that I knew that was just cool and smarter than me is also an executive coach. So I could actually learn more from him. This is incredible. I'll give you my quick professional background. As you know, I studied engineering at Michigan, and first real job out of school was at McKinsey with you, and was trying to learn from you early on. Enjoyed the work there, did more work in our operations practice, and then left McKinsey actually with an intention to go back, but at the time, thinking, man, it would be cool to do something totally different. And so I ended up starting a company with a couple of people. We started a company that made solar products in rural India. So moved to India, built a factory and supply chain. That was kind of my first experience building what I would call my own team. And when I learned about myself, I learned a couple of things. First, I loved working on things that improve the quality of life for people. Building a solar home energy system that we delivered into off-grid areas was so meaningful. It just was very meaningful. When putting points on the board involved changing people's lives, that extra piece of motivation was everything to me. The second thing I learned is how much I like working with people towards that common goal. I really, the joy of doing something with a team, of accomplishing something with a group of people was unique to me. And that was a tough business. We ended up selling that business to an Indian company. I went to business school. Post-business school, I was looking to work in a space, in an industry, and at a company that I felt had a similar type of mission that improved quality of life for people. That's what pushed me into healthcare services. My first stint in healthcare services was with a company called Paladina Health. It was a startup at the time within DaVita, which was and is a Fortune 500 kidney care company. At the time, DaVita was experimenting outside of kidney care. And so they had this internal startup called Paladina. It was in what we call direct primary care. Again, a business that is about improving people's lives through better access to primary care. It was an early employee there, was there for a couple of years. And then I got outreach from the CEO of Virta Health, which is the company I'm currently at. And when I heard about the mission at Virta, which is to reverse diabetes in 100 million people, first I thought it was a little bit out there. Because at the time, this is 2016, reversing diabetes wasn't a known thing, wasn't a real thing. But once I learned that it could be done and I heard a little bit of the early patient stories, I literally felt like I couldn't go anywhere else. I was like, man, I just have to go to a place where we're doing this type of work. And I've been here for the last 6.5 years, have seen the company grow from kind of 20 people to or upwards of 500 now, and have been a part of that journey, a part of that growth, and a part of the impact that we both have. So that's a little bit of my background.
That's amazing, man. I love it. I mean, I wouldn't expect any different, in terms of what you've been up to. I actually almost forgot the India story in terms of what you've been up to back then as an entrepreneur. But it's a good reminder because I think it's from what you are trying to do and what you have been trying to do in terms of mission driven, people oriented, whether it is a B2B, B2C, but really at the end of the day, impacting people's lives. It's such an unbelievably powerful thing to be involved with. Tell us a little bit about, between your different journeys, what have been some common themes that you've enjoyed, and what have been some common learnings that you're like, you know what, glad I learned that. I'm probably not going to go back there again as it relates to all of the work that you've been doing.
Yeah. Some of the things that I've enjoyed the most, again, the top one would be delivering something that I feel drives value and improves the quality of life for people. And here at Virta, I mean, we start every Monday morning we have an all hands call. And on that all hands call, we have a patient come and talk about their Virta experience. And 95% of the time, that discussion, they say something to the effect of, Virta's changed my life, saved my life, improved my life. That I've been here 6.5 years. We do this every Monday morning. You would think one gets tired of it. I don't. Like, literally every time I hear it, it just hypes me up. And so that would be that's one thing that I would say I'm always drawn towards. When you're drawn towards that, I think you're also drawn towards people that are like that. And so whether it's Sami, who's the person I've worked with and for the last 7 years or 6.5 years, or the people that are on my team and all, I think by and large, that's part of our culture. That's part of what we cultivate. And so I'm also drawn towards that. And I want to spend time with people that are using their incredibly talented, incredibly smart, but also humble and hungry and want to drive that mission forward. I think a couple of other things are, I guess there are two ways to say this. And one of them is like very pedantic, which is, I'm drawn towards complex problems. That's kind of true. But I think the thing that I've learned and that now I run towards a little bit more is that there's no easy business. I think like oftentimes outside in, you could look at other things. Oh man, it must have been so easy. Facebook in 2006 must have been so easy. Things were just blowing up and everybody was getting it. No, like shit was hard for them too, right? Like we didn't have cloud infrastructure, so they were figuring out how to turn servers on. And so I think that another thing that I'm kind of drawn towards is this. I have an underlying belief that there's not an easy business. There's nobody that makes an easy buck. And so rather than being afraid of that and being like, oh, complexity, if it's a complex problem, great. Because that just improves our competitive advantage when we figure it out. That's some of the approach I take. And healthcare, now having worked in healthcare for 10 years, let me tell you, it's all complex, there are like a bunch of different players in it. So that's another thing that I think I'm a little bit more drawn towards, especially over the years. Again, when I started that first company, I think that when we found out how complex it was to distribute, durable home energy products into rural areas, I wouldn't say we ran away from it, but it certainly was one of these things where like, oh my God, this business is so hard to scale. And I remember now when I think back on that, I was like, duh, like they don't have electricity, they don't have roads, you're distributing a durable home good. That's hard. It's an obvious thing, but figuring it out is crazy valuable, right? And when you figure these things out in business, you create a lot of value. So those are some of the top things I think I'm attracted towards. I think what I'm not as attracted to, or some of the things I think I now more avoid, is the sounds kind of odd, but I think I try to avoid where I would try to avoid businesses or situations where there's a lot of resource and there's a lot going into it at the time. And the reason I say that is because then I think too often you get stuck in incrementalism. We're like, hey, we got to improve margins by half a point. And I think that ends up creating a world where I guess there just isn't as much creativity. There might, or or the creativity is very like in one area. And I find that it also creates, I think, competition among people. And I feel like competition among the team is, I always want to be in a place where we're like, oh, we got to beat X, and X is outside of our four walls, so to speak. And I think I've been at places or seen places where the competition is within the four walls. Certainly some of the places, some of the clients we served at our firm, that was the case. And I've certainly talked to a lot of folks and friends that work in those organizations. By the way, that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of value to that. I do think that like some of these, it's again a resource constrained environment in its own way. And, but I just find I'm not into that. I like to say, hey, like it's us against the world versus, hey, it's us against each other so we could do better for the world, which again is a paradigm that works. There are easy problems in business and they're in there that are made hard by people. And I think that I try to avoid that. You never can, by the way, as Rohit, like you always end up, people are the complexity, that just are like, you get more than three people together and you have at least four opinions. And so that, that always exists. But I think by and large, when I could be focused on solving hard business problems with great people versus hard people problems in an okay business, I would much rather take hard business problems with great people.
Yeah, it's such an important thing that you said right at the end, right? Which is, I think if I was to summarize what you just shared, is that all business problems are generally complex. However, where the complexity comes from is an important piece to think about. And I know we're programmed to get ahead of the problem, but in that same spirit, as you've thought about navigating where you find yourself most excited, you're looking for problems that genuinely can shape some people's lives, right? A lot of people's lives. And inherently in healthcare, the problems are complex. Your mantra is to get great people around you to be able to solve really hard problems. But one thing that you said in the same piece was, but people are people. I think they also make what could be an already very hard problem becomes even harder when you've got people with the best intentions, the best mindset, brilliant minds. It still gets more complex. So question there for you, Amit, is that how do you find people? And two-part question. How did you find? So I happen to know Sammy. I happen to know Paladina, Amar. In fact, I had a conversation with both of them many a times, and brilliant guys themselves, very passionate human beings, very emotionally high EQ in their own very unique ways.
Very unique. Having worked for both of them, very unique.
Yeah, very unique. And they're both mission-driven human beings as well. And so I think the two-part question is, how did you, through your diligence, what do you look for? One or two things that give you that insight into, okay, because they're so different, how do I know that there's, at the end of the day, the essence is still the same of, mission-driven EQ? What questions do you ask? But then now that you're building teams and you've built many teams and scaled businesses, how do you ask those questions for those who want to work with you?
Yeah.
Love to hear that.
Yeah. And I would say maybe this is a bit of a caveat to the second one, but this, I definitely don't have 100% hit rate. If anybody did, that'd be amazing. And I will buy their book for sure. Does. Maybe you do, Bassi. I take that you do. Let me start, but I will start in the right order. And so you first asked me, what do I ask or how did I get the opportunity basically to get to work with people like Amar and Sami? I would say what I've looked for over the years has changed, but the way that I have found to get the best, look, so much of finding the right person is relationship driven. And I think for me, what worked particularly well, especially in this most recent situation with Sami, is that, and this very well because you were one of these people, I talked to literally everybody I could that had worked with Sami in any way before. And this was because I think that we have a lot of, everybody has a lot of bias when they first talk to someone. Like the first time I spoke to Sami, I definitely thought something and he thought something of me. And in general, it was positive, but whatever, And I think that you get so much out of experience with someone. And so I talked to everybody I could that had worked with him and tried to understand like what makes him tick, what makes him different, what makes him, how can I be successful working with him? And what I did with in that situation is I literally asked for what I would call reverse reference checks. I said, look, you can talk to whoever has worked with me, but I want to talk to a couple of people that have worked with you that you recommend that I can get to know how it is to work with you. And I think this is something that, especially at more senior levels, is incredibly valuable because again, everybody is smart and, hardworking for the most part, diligent, driven, etc. And the relationship and the way you're smart, the way you're hardworking, the way you're diligent, that ends up mattering a lot in these executive relationships. And so that's where I think talking to other people, I got a sense as to, how does Sami work? How is he smart? What is his, what makes him tick, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a key piece of it. For me, I asked him questions directly. And again, sounds very, very simple, but I did ask, hey, in people that have worked with you for a long time, what has made them successful? Like, what are 3 traits that you think have made them successful? And he shared those with me. And I thought about whether I had those traits. Like, I legitimately was like, oh, am I a person that would be successful working for him, given he thinks that these are the traits that would make me successful? And I think it's a real question because I think too often, we're focused on, is this the right job? Do I have the right skill set? And all of that could be true. But if he was looking for someone who was quiet and, I don't know, I'm trying to think of things that I'm not, I just would have to be like, look, I'm not your guy. I could probably do this job if the job was just the job description. But if you're looking for someone that shows up in this way, it's not going to be me. And so anyway, those are some of the things that come to mind. Again, the one other thing I'll say about Sami is, which it's taken me years to recognize fully, but it's one of those things I believed at the start, and every day, week, month, year I work with him, I realize it even more and more, is that he's totally mission driven. And that I don't have a good answer for you as to how I would have known that earlier. I kind of believed it, and I just believe it more and more every day. Some of it is like the way he talks about the work, the way he talked about what we were doing for the world and how we serve our patients and whatnot. But I can't put my finger on exactly what that was. So.
And how do you, that's really helpful because how do you then, the words that you use was how he works and how he is smart, how he is driven. I think during diligence, I think the sort of stepping back, the big takeaway is that do your diligence. You do your diligence, follow a process, whether it is reverse reference calls, whether it is asking smart questions, take the time. You also, by the sounds of it, took time to do that diligence. You didn't just rush into it. How has that part now helped you when you're in the reverse end of it, which is you're acquiring talent? And how have you applied that to either improve your process, build a process, but also, you're in a mission driven and you're working with Sami, who's obviously, as you said, mission driven. But not everyone on the planet is that way, but they do have skills. And how do you identify a ready-made, if there is such a thing, because I haven't found them either, versus close to ready-made? Like, what's your, 2 or 3 things that you do to both identify them, and then how do you make the final decision? Yeah, that's the one on my team.
Yeah. In terms of trying to find the talent, I think I do a handful of things that, again, all of them are things that you've heard or seen, but I'll talk about my process a little bit. I think I spend a fair amount of time trying to distill what success in the role would look like. And I try to split it into, these are the kind of traits that, that I think someone needs. And I try to get it down to 3 to 5. Like these are the traits. And then this is the working style that I think would be successful. And again, I try to get that down to 3 to 5. Like someone who, if I'm looking for a team leader, what type of team leader is it? Do they have to be out in front and loud and rallying the troops and all? Do they just have to be a great subject matter expert so that they can get the trust of the team? Do they, but they don't have to be out in front about it. They just have to, like, when, they're, oftentimes when you're looking for technical leaders, when you're looking for a CTO or something, engineers don't always need someone who's raw and out in front, but they need someone that they can trust and they believe and they feel understands their field. Very different sometimes than operating leaders. Like sometimes you're looking for someone who's running a customer success team, you might want someone who can really get people fired up because, God, you got to bust through tickets, customer success tickets like this. But like we say, okay, what are the skills that they need? And skills could include basically knowledge of software systems and all. Like, what are the skills of 3 to 5, maybe 6? And what are the 2 to 3 to 5 traits that, leadership type of traits? Like, how does this person show up So try to get it down to that list. And then everybody I talk to, whether it's a phone screen, a final round interview, a recruiter screen, someone else is talking to them on my behalf. I have them literally rate them on those things. Like every time I talk, I force myself to go back to that rubric and say, oh, does that change what I think and I try to make the rubric pretty simple. Like 3 is you're like in the top decile in this trait. Like you're just like one of the best, and I say decile because you're not top 1%, but top 10%. 2 is, good, you're solid. I'm not gonna have to worry about it. 1 is not a strength, but could probably get there. And then 0 is not gonna like you just it just isn't your thing, thing you're good at. And I just try to keep updating that. So I think that's one thing that I think is somewhat unique because I know I think oftentimes you go unicorn hunting. You look for someone who's like a little bit of everything. And when you do that, and I've done this, but this is a mistake I've made. You find someone who like on paper is great enough, but again, they don't fit that, right? You don't get to that. You don't get that. It turns out like you hired, and I'll just extend the example. You hired an eng leader who's super raw and your eng team is sitting there being, that doesn't motivate me at all, And so it's, so that's one thing I do. I think the second thing is I go through I think the second thing, which I already mentioned a little bit, but I have everybody focus on a couple of those traits, plus a couple of their own, hey, what are 1 to 3 things that you're looking for? And usually when you have people interviewing, they're going to work with them in some way. So I say, basically, here are the 2 to 3 things from my list I want you to focus on. Give me your 2 things that are not on this list that you think are important. And I want to hear your thoughts on that. And so I try to, again, get them to be as driven around getting that data, getting that information. The third thing is a real work example. I always, both in interview questions or in discussions, and usually at some point in the process, I either ask for like, when did you do X or how did you do Y? And have them talk me through a process, because again, I'm trying to get a sense as to how they work and how they delivered something. I rarely, if ever, ask questions like, what did you deliver? It's somewhat irrelevant, especially, but how did you do it is what I try to get to. And I always try to do some version of a project where they're working with the team so you can see how they show up, test some of the hypotheses that you've got. And then the last thing is I do a lot of that might not be the last thing, but one other thing is that a lot of the similar reference checks and reverse reference checks. And what I'm actually looking for, I think what one interesting thing that I've learned is I'm not actually looking for strengths and weaknesses. That's not what I'm looking for when I do the reversing. I'm looking for how accurate their self-awareness around those types of things are and how they respond. And so one of the reference check questions that I ask almost everybody that I talk to on behalf, when I'm thinking about bringing someone on, is like, what is the best way to give this person feedback? Like, how you had to give this person feedback. How did you do it where you best got them to respond? And then I try to think if I could give feedback that way. Is that a way that I can? Because at the end of the day, the question isn't whether I'm going to need to give them feedback. That's, of course, there's nobody's perfect. The question is, how am I going to be able to deliver it in a way where they're going to be able to respond and get better? If the answer to that question is yes, then we'll probably work our way through most problems, right? And if the answer to that question is no, then shit, we're going to have a lot of problems and we're going to end up going this way because, and so I ask a lot about how to give the feedback, and then I ask for examples, like what feedback did you give and how did it work? Sometimes I've had to really train myself to tell the person I'm talking to, I'm not asking you this to know, I don't care about the content of the feedback. Like, oh, so-and-so had smelly shoes like that. That's not what I'm looking for. Like, how did you say that it worked for them to know that they had smelly shoes and they got clean shoes? That's what I'm looking for. And so I do a lot of that's what I spend a lot of time on the reverse or on the reference checks on. And then I cross-check that with what I learned from the person. Do they know how they like to receive feedback? Do they know how they show up in these ways, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, look, it's obviously clear that you've got a really well-defined process that works for you. But the most important thing that stands out is you have a process, which is that it is, yes, of course, you have iterated over the years, but I love all of it because in the book, I even talk about having clarity. I think it starts with having clarity. What are you solving for, right? In the role, the job description is just a list of bullets and it becomes really hard really quickly. Because you're not clear on at the end of the day, what would make that person successful. And then you start from there, which is, okay, now that I know myself, what I'm solving for or my organization, now I have a reference point, and then so you build from it. And I think the other piece that you brought up was that while you didn't say it, clearly there's a team effort, in this process. So you've got not just you making the call, you've involved other people from the team, which has so many other beautiful things that come with it, which is it adds more color context to the overall job, but the team is already bought in because now they know that the type of person coming in, what would they be doing to bring, to deliver against the mission that you guys are working towards. And then the third piece that I love about the reference checks is I've always said reference checks are not, a lot of people discount reference checks that, oh, of course they'll be good. I also say the reference checks is just still part of your diligence. You're still learning about the person on the other end, albeit you only do reference checks for the last person standing because you don't want to be spending time, but then for everybody. But in that process, you're really still learning. You're getting to know the person who's going to come on board. So view it as a continuation of the interview process, not a culminate. The interview has been completed. Now let's just tick the box off. And whether it is what you're defining, which is how would you coach the person, and what the skills that you need to be able to do that, or it is to understand what motivates the person in a different environment, and I also do reference, whether it is a senior or junior role, I do recommend a 360 with peers and somebody that work, for them, because how they come across to different people, how they manage upwards. Because the thing goes back to the same thing that, I'm not ever the perfect boss. And so how can I learn? How would I learn? And would they be comfortable in telling me when I've, made lots of mistakes? And they're like, oh, you know what? I'd like you to do differently. So it's a really, I love what you're saying because it does bring out at the end of the day, the essence of what you're describing, Amit, is that you spend a lot of time, you invest a lot of time in your candidates to really get to know them. Because if you don't, then it doesn't serve you, the mission of your company, and them, the candidate, right? Because they may have some amazing value that is perfect for a different organization. And so by bringing somebody on who may look good at paper, you may do them injustice, but then also have dilutive effects on your organization and your mission. So I love this, man. This is great. One thing that I know we're close on time. One question I had for you was that at the end of the day, you went through this process, and you scaled up. How do you balance between which roles you interview and you get involved, which you've said, you know what, the team does it and you don't. As you've gotten bigger early on, was it everybody you talk to? Do you still talk to everybody that comes on the team? Or have you decided that, look, only for specific roles I get involved, but then others, the other members of the team take on and, you just happen to get to know them once they've joined?
I don't have a hard and fast rule on this. It does go role by role as it relates to obviously anyone that directly reports to me. I own the hiring process completely and would be very involved. And the process I just spoke about is more for that group of people. For folks on the team, I work with for folks on, that report to someone who report to me, et cetera. I just work with the leader to understand what they are. I try to make sure we're running a tight process and that the leader that's hiring them is running a tight process. I get involved primarily, if the scope is such that there will be a fair amount of interaction with me. I think it's helpful for for that person to meet me, right? And for them to understand that I will be someone that they'll have to deal with for better or for worse. And so I often say that. I say, look, if they're going to have to deal with me, make sure they meet me before they start. They know that. And most leaders on my team are none of that. The other time, like to get a little bit more involved is when we honestly don't know, like when it was, hey, we're hiring for a piece of the business that we're not sure how it's going to shake out. We don't know, is it going to grow super fast? Or is this the type of thing like, hey, we might have to reallocate this person because we're not totally sure. And so then that creates, to go back to the rubric, that creates a little bit of lack of clarity in the top bucket of what's the exact set of rate. And that's where I think it's helpful for me to get involved. So yeah, look, like at that point, you're taking a bet on the person and that you're going to be able to and so that's where I like to get involved in some of those a little bit more. And then I really leave it to the hiring manager beyond that, I leave it to the hiring manager. Do you want me to be there and be involved in it, and at what level? Yeah, and again, there are multiple that then you could go down a rabbit hole, like when that would make sense. Yeah.
I'm sure there are instances, because not everyone's coming in, I'm guessing, of the candidate pool with stellar resumes, saying, hey, I believe in the mission already. So some people are technically very strong or functionally very strong, and they may have some of the other traits as you've sort of highlighted. However, they may not be as passionate about the business as you were. Even in your case, as you had to learn more about it. But as you scale teams, it becomes harder and harder for small, medium businesses, growing startups to sort of find, passion, mission, skills, capabilities all in one bundle. And so how often do you find yourself like, look, I'm going to hire for the capability and the high EQ, you've sort of highlighted somebody who's really work well with people, coachable, and then they may or may not have the passion for the mission yet, but they can get there, versus reverse it. I'm only going to hire people who are on the mission, and then capability is secondary. Like, how do you do that sort of calculus, or have you not had to yet?
We've introduced some of it, but and I know by the way you phrase your question, of course, is in more extremes. I've never felt it to be at that extreme, right? I've never been like, oh, this person like perfect mission fit, but doesn't have the right capabilities. That wouldn't make sense for the business, right? At the end of the day, we're a business, and on the vice versa, has no belief in the mission, but is a perfect fit in every other way. Again, wouldn't be right for the business. But again, to your point, it's never been at those extremes. I certainly tilt towards the right fit and understand our mission. If you and understand our mission and have exhibited some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you kind of early signs that it could be mean more to you, right? Like early signs that you don't have to, again, I mean, we're large enough now, 500 teammates, growing pretty fast. Like the time when we had just purely mission driven people is a little bit gone, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. We are a very mission driven company and still, but I think that, yeah, we do end up hiring people that are for the right role, but we don't, it's certainly not at the senior level of the company. I would say the executive team and the broader senior management team. I don't think we have anybody that I would say is not very well tied to the mission. Again, there are degrees of freedom there, right? There are folks who bring an incredible skill set to the team and just believe in our mission and, but aren't necessarily, this isn't the only type of mission they'd work for. They'd work for other missions, but this is an important one to them. And that's kind of where we are. I don't think we're in a space, or will honestly be in a space for at least the foreseeable future, where we'd go too far away from hiring people that have any affiliation to the mission. Yeah. And again, and this, and I'll just say it again, we haven't been in a stark trade-off world where it's one or the other. We usually find people that are, hey, it'd be cool to work for a company that does this. There might be like me, like I told you earlier on, I'm not sure that this can be done, but if you say it can be done, it looks like it's a pretty cool thing. I'm willing to, figure that out with you. And then, again,
that's the key that you just said at the end. I presented the extremes to then sort of draw that conversation, because a lot of small, medium businesses may not be mission driven, right? Like they're doing simple things that are, as you said, every business is hard, and they're trying to attract candidates to come work for them and take a chance on them, because anyone who works for you, especially early stage or growth stage, they are taking a risk on multiple fronts, right? There's an opportunity cost, but there's also, whether or not this is going to last. And so they're believing in the person that they're talking to. And so in your case, the mission is very clear, but for small businesses, it may or may not be very, exciting, or it may not be very it may not resonate with them, but they're still believe in the person. So I think a lot of times what I found is that the person that they're talking to explains the mission or their vision. If it's not a mission, it's a vision for the company, and that they have to buy that vision. And so your ability as a leader, as a person who acquiring talent, if you can't deliver that vision of where the company is going at a minimum, and then if you have a mission on top of it, then it becomes even easier to explain. And so it was more a context, which is super helpful, that you are looking for, ultimately you need people to be able to do their job. And that's the end, that's the stage gate one minimum requirement, is do the job. And then if you, in your world, having alignment with the mission and being able to help people. And without that, it becomes difficult to just, to pairing the two would make a lot more sense, a lot more powerful sort of combo.
Right.
I mean, I will, as we end the conversation, maybe you can leave us with, again, potentially extremes, but one thought of what you would recommend people who are listening to this, building teams or have teams, but acquiring talent. You'd say, absolutely, please do this, try this out, or this is one thing that, I highly recommend that you must do in your process, because you've given us a lot of amazing nuggets of what you do, and already people can learn a lot from it. But what's the one thing you say, please do? And what's the one thing you're like, please don't do? Try to avoid this. What would your counsel be on those two fronts?
Yeah. Crazy that people would listen to my counsel. I'll give it a shot. I have two things on the do list. One is to invest the time to get down to the key traits, like that initial process that I shared of here is what we are looking for. I just so often find leaders that I talk to, when you ask them what they're looking for, they just have this laundry list of everything. And I think that makes it so hard to hire, because we live in a high talent density world. There are people that will have 5 of the 10 things. Is that enough or not? And it's just, then you end up confusing yourself, because you're like, do I want, the blue unicorn or the golden unicorn? Like, I don't know, Yes. And so that would be one thing, is I think the time invested up front to clarify what you are looking for yourself, like you're doing that for you, saves so much time and so many other people's times when you're getting into the conversations. The second thing is kind of a weird do, but I'll share it, which is share what you're not good at. I didn't talk about this, but make sure you share what you're not good at in the interview process. Like, one of the things that I try to do pretty proactively is tell people what they're walking into when they're working with me, and try to give them the real DL on what they might not like, because the worst thing is when they learn that on week 2 and both of you look at each other and say, oh, like, this is going to be a tough 6, 12, 24, 48 months. Like, it's just the worst. And so I didn't talk a lot about that, but I encourage anybody to do reverse reference checks on me, and try to even go to the extent, I've done this, send screenshots of recent 360s, just to be like, look, like, this is the type of feedback I get. And like, some of it's good. Here's the good stuff, but here's the stuff that's not so good. And I'm working on it. I got stuff to work on, just like all of us, and I'm working the shit on it. Like, I want to get better, but just know that's how I show up sometimes. So that's my do's. On my don'ts, LinkedIn and resumes don't tell much of a story. Like, I find a lot of people that are like, oh, so-and-so's LinkedIn is, and I'm like, man, that's great. That doesn't really mean anything to me, and I don't, that's not, and by the way, I use LinkedIn a ton. I think it's a great way to network, get to know. But when you get into the process, of course, like, expect to learn everything from your process and very little LinkedIn and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I actually, those are amazing do's and don'ts. I think clarity, and then also transparency. If I had to pick 2 words, I think the 2 words that define the do is be clear in what you're solving for, and be transparent in who you are and what the company is and is not. And I think that also the right talent gets motivated by, because then they can find what gaps are they going to come in and help fill, right? Whether it's a growth gap, whether it is the reverse coaching gap, whether it is the team gap, let them make that decision. You can only offer up the data, but please offer up the data, right? Which is, I think what you do is unbelievable, and that sharing the 360 feedback. For a lot of companies, they don't even have that process to get the 360 feedback, let alone be able to share it. And then I think in that there are so many other things that you can do as a lesson or teaching from you. On the LinkedIn piece, I think you're right. LinkedIn is a very powerful tool. I think one of the things that I've found LinkedIn as a people, there's sometimes I've found inconsistencies between the resume I receive and the LinkedIn, which has been a really great way of doing your diligence. So use it as an input into your diligence, but do your diligence is what you're saying. Make sure that you get through it. The thing that I'm going to steal from, I'm going to take a lot from this anyway, but the one thing I really loved at the beginning of your conversation about Virta is your all hands on deck meeting, and then how a patient comes and, tells their story. We can all do that with our customers. I mean, listening to our customers is, at the end of the day, that's where you have a business, and listening to the end recipient of entire team's work, everything we talked about, every effort we put in, all the hard work you put in, and everyone around you is for that company or that individual's benefit. And so it is such a beautiful and empowering and an honest way to get feedback, that you are literally in touch with your clients, and not just one person, everyone involved. And you hear the good and the bad. And I think you can improve the things that you need to improve, but also it's I can only imagine how energizing it would be when you hear a small nugget of how their lives or their business changed, for B2B companies, like how business has improved and how that might empower those who are typically further removed from the end product. They're doing their bit, but they don't get to see how their bit, whether it's an engineer or a landscaper, or, you've got somebody working in janitorial services or training, whatever the business is, sometimes the people working behind the scenes don't know what happened. And it is such a beautiful idea. I'm going to probably maybe starting today, start doing that. And so congratulations to you, Sammy, the entire team, for an unbelievable journey. I've been watching you guys. I mean, Sammy talked about this a very long time ago before you were in part of it. I think it's just seeing what you guys have built, how you've done it, the energy that you're exuding on the call, which is no less than what I would have expected from you. I loved it. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing very transparently everything that you do and how you built it. And I can't wait to see, the new heights that you guys will get to, and the impact you're having. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Bassi. This has been great. Thanks for inviting me and giving me a chance to reflect. As I shared with you a little bit earlier, I just haven't taken the breather as much as I would have liked to, or reflect on some of these things. I did find that I would have a long answer to a question, and you would put it down to a word. And so I appreciate that. I'm like, I'm taking notes for myself. I'm like, yeah, clarity and transparency. That is what I said. So thank you for that.
You know what? I just like you, I did go to School of Frameworks, so
It does.
Be well. I'll speak to you soon, Amit. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Bassi.
Take care.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of the People Quotient podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to give us a like and invite your friends and colleagues to join us in this community. Until next time, stay focused on your people. Signing off, Rohit Bassi.